There are crimes that go unsolved because the evidence is destroyed. There are crimes that go unsolved because the perpetrator disappears. And then there are crimes that remain unsolved because the story itself becomes larger than the truth. The Zodiac Killer belongs to that last category. More than 50 years later, people are still arguing over suspects, still decoding letters, still convinced that this time we're just one revelation away from finally knowing who he was. But here's the uncomfortable question almost no one asks. What if the Zodiac case isn't unsolved because we're missing the right suspect? What if it's unsolved because the killer understood something about people, fear, and attention long before social media ever existed? Today, we're not going to chase suspects. We're not going to rank theories. And we're definitely not going to glorify the killer. Instead, we're going to pull the case apart from a different angle, one that explains why the Zodiac still owns space in our collective imagination, why law enforcement struggled in ways that had nothing to do with incompetence, and why the mystery may never truly be solved in the way people want. Because the Zodiac wasn't just committing murder, he was building a narrative. When people first hear about the Zodiac Killer, they usually imagine a mastermind, someone hyper-intelligent, meticulous, always 10 steps ahead of the police. But the reality is far messier. The earliest Zodiac attacks weren't cinematic, they weren't clever, they weren't especially sophisticated, they were violent, chaotic, and opportunistic young couples parked in isolated places, attacked late at night, often with mistakes made during the crime itself. At the time, nothing about these murders screamed legendary serial killer. That label only emerged later. And that's important, because the Zodiac didn't begin as a myth. He became one through repetition, interpretation, and amplification. Early investigators didn't even know they were dealing with a serial offender. These crimes occurred across different locations, used different weapons, and left behind inconsistent evidence. In the late 1960s, the infrastructure for cross-jurisdictional data sharing was primitive compared to today. Separate departments handled separate cases, often without seamless communication. This wasn't negligence, it was limitation. And the Zodiac exploited that fragmentation perfectly. One of the most misunderstood aspects of the Zodiac case is the letters. People fixate on the ciphers, the symbols, the threats, but they miss the most important detail. The letters weren't about hiding information. They were about controlling attention. The Zodiac didn't send letters to evade capture. He sent letters to frame the story. Every letter created pressure. Every threat forced institutions to react. Every cipher invited the public to participate. And once the public became involved, something irreversible happened. The case stopped being purely investigative. It became cultural. When newspapers printed his letters, often reluctantly, they weren't just sharing information. They were validating his existence. They were confirming that if he spoke, the world would listen. And from that moment on, the Zodiac wasn't just killing people. He was managing an audience. This is where modern comparisons become uncomfortable, because if you strip away the paper, the stamps, and the typewritten threats, the Zodiac's behavior looks eerily familiar. He escalated when attention dipped. He teased information without fully revealing it. He exaggerated his accomplishments. He framed himself as smarter than authorities. He thrived on speculation. In other words, he behaved like someone who understood engagement. Long before algorithms, the Zodiac understood something essential. People don't just fear violence. They fear uncertainty, and uncertainty keeps them watching. One of the biggest mistakes people make when analyzing this case is assuming consistency. They assume the Zodiac was always the same person, operating with the same motivations, using the same level of planning. But human behavior doesn't work that way, especially not under stress. Across the confirmed Zodiac attacks, descriptions of the killer vary. Body type changes, age estimates fluctuate, confidence shifts. Even the way the attacks unfold feels inconsistent, sometimes rushed, sometimes theatrical, sometimes oddly careless. Rather than seeing this as proof of multiple killers or unreliable witnesses, there's another explanation that fits just as well. The Zodiac evolved. Not upward sideways. He adapted his behavior based on what worked emotionally, not what worked strategically. When fear worked, he leaned into fear. When mystery worked, he leaned into mystery. When confusion worked, he let confusion breathe. This wasn't about perfection. It was about impact. And here's where the case takes a darker psychological turn. The Zodiac's most disturbing statements aren't the violent ones. They're the ones about meaning. In his letters, he doesn't just describe killing, he justifies it. He reframes it. He assigns it purpose. He places himself at the center of a private mythology where his actions matter beyond death itself. This isn't the language of someone obsessed with being caught. It's the language of someone terrified of being insignificant, which reframes everything. The Zodiac didn't want prison. He didn't want execution. And he didn't want anonymity. What he wanted was permanence, a name that survived him. This helps explain why the suspect debates are endless, because every suspect becomes a proxy for closure. Arthur Leigh Allen, Lawrence Kane, Earl Van Best Jr. Each theory promises something seductive, an ending. But endings are uncomfortable when the story itself has outgrown the facts. Every suspect has contradictions. Every timeline has gaps. Every piece of strong evidence dissolves under scrutiny. And the more time passes, the harder resolution becomes. Memories degrade. Witnesses die. Evidence standards change. Context disappears. The case doesn't stagnate because investigators stopped caring. It stagnates because time is the ultimate eraser. This is why the DNA discovery in the early 2000s, while important, didn't deliver the breakthrough people expected. Partial profiles can eliminate suspects, but they rarely provide certainty without a perfect match. And when the original biological material is compromised by handling, by age, by unknown variables, DNA becomes a narrowing tool, not a finishing one. The public hears DNA and imagines finality. But in cold cases, DNA often creates new ambiguity. And ambiguity feeds obsession. There's another uncomfortable truth we need to confront. The Zodiac case endures not because of how many people were killed, but because of how he communicated. There are other serial killers with higher confirmed body counts. There are crimes with more brutality. There are cases with greater forensic complexity. But few cases invited the public inside the killer's head the way this one did. The Zodiac spoke, and when someone who commits violence also narrates it, the crime becomes something else entirely. It becomes a story. This is why theories about copycats persist. Not because they're provable, but because they feel right. The later communications don't always align with the earlier crimes. The tone shifts, the confidence inflates, the threats become grander while the violence diminishes. It's possible the Zodiac stopped killing long before he stopped writing. It's possible he never killed again at all. And that possibility terrifies people more than the idea of him being caught, because it suggests something worse than a monster on the loose. It suggests a man who achieved exactly what he wanted, attention without consequence. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a case that functions less like a puzzle and more like a mirror. A mirror reflecting our fascination with mystery, our hunger for villains, our discomfort with unanswered questions. The Zodiac didn't just expose flaws in policing. He exposed something about us, that we struggle to let stories end without resolution, that we confuse speculation with understanding, that sometimes the search for meaning becomes more important than the truth itself. And here's the final, unsettling thought. If the Zodiac were alive today, he wouldn't need letters. He wouldn't need newspapers. He wouldn't need ciphers. Because we've built platforms designed to do exactly what he wanted: amplify, speculate, repeat. Which raises the question we should be asking instead of, who was the Zodiac Killer? What do we reward with our attention? And what kinds of monsters are created when attention becomes the prize? Because mysteries don't survive on silence. They survive on us. If you made it this far, thank you for sitting with discomfort instead of demanding easy answers. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Zodiac case. Not every story ends with a name. Some end with a choice. Whether we keep feeding the mystery or finally let it rest.